This is what I built previously as the pièce de résistance, so you people better not let me down. French pressure. By the way, panelists, if somebody asks a question, just for the benefit of the video, can you repeat the gist of the questions so that it's picked up by the videographer, Kelly? Okay. So my co-host for the day, Richard Marshall, is going to be emceeing this panel, but I'm going to ask the kick-off question. And I'm going to put it to Alex Bucket. I should really introduce everybody first, shouldn't I? Right, first of all, we've got Joe Lomico from TUV SUD, the loquacious Joe Lomico.
My word.
We've got Mustinir Ali from Element. We've got Simon Dunkley, who you've already heard from today. He's from ITRON. We've got Raz Atale from Siemens. We've got David Pashley from Direct Insights, and we've got Alex Buchan from SafeShark. So kick-off question, starting with 6. From SafeShark's perspective, what are the biggest gaps you currently see between how manufacturers' readiness for the CRA and what will actually be required to demonstrate compliance and ongoing cyber resilience once the CRA is fully enforceable?
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, so afternoon, everyone. I'm Alex Buchan. I'm a director at SafeShark. We're a compliance test house specifically for cybersecurity. So manufacturers send us products, we test them against the standards for PSTI, for RED, and now for CRA. So manufacturers can access the market, sell their products, and continue to kind of make money, hopefully. But we speak to a lot of manufacturers of products. Anything we've tested everything from toilets through to showers, through to TVs, through to all sorts of stuff. So a huge range of things. And but generally, the manufacturers all have the same kind of questions they come to you with. And it's what's in scope? What have I got to do? How am I going to do this? And that was always the case for RED. And RED which is a Radio Equipment Directive, which is where the kind of cybersecurity requirements first came in, was fairly straightforward. You had to send your product, you had to get it tested against a standard, you had a test report, and then you could access the market. I think we've heard today that CRA raises that level of requirement to a kind of much more organisational level. You've got a lot of processes to get in place, you've got a lot of organisational structure to get in place, and you've still got to do your testing. So the question we're getting at the moment is, what have I got to do? And essentially, we always say to the manufacturers, there's kind of 3 main things you've got to do. First one is get your vulnerability process started, get that kind of operational, get that in place. And although you don't need to necessarily have that in place for Article 14, which is in September, it's not mandated you have all these vulnerability handling things in place. The outcomes of Article 14 are that you report things to ANISA, would require that you do have to have some kind of process in place. So even though vulnerability handling is not required till December next year, we would advise that you get this done now, and that will enable your September requirements. So get your vulnerability handling done. Second thing is get communication mechanisms set up. There's a lot of requirements to coordinate with third-party suppliers, coordinate with users, make sure you've got secure communication mechanisms in place. So get those processes set up. And then the third thing is really understand where your products sit in the CRA. There's lots of different categories. There's lots of different kind of ways you can interpret things. So go through your products, understand how they fit into the CRA, and that will help determine, okay, what's our next step? Is it a default product? Which standard are we going to use? And what's our process from there? So we very much kind of, I think it was mentioned, there's a lot of discussion about requirements and not much about measurement. So we very much kind of turned this into, and this is how you do it, and this is the process to kind of get on the market. So we follow those steps. We advise manufacturers to do that, and then we've kind of outlined some clear ways you can kind of start that off. So that would be my answer to that one. Chris, who's over there now.
Thank you, Alex. Anybody else from the panel wants to add a footnote to that, or should we open questions to the floor?
Can I step on a little bit here, because I think what Alex was saying was absolutely right. But some of the conversations I've had here in the room today is that there are a couple, maybe more than a couple, there are little bits in the CRA that I think we've missed, or I've missed. And let me give you an example. We're just talking about it now. Article 19. when a manufacturer, or I say an importer, rebadges the product, they become the manufacturer. It says it there. But the question is, and we see that all the time, right? We've read everything. However, what, and this is a kind of a rhetorical question, but I'll certainly if anyone wants to answer it, how much IP are the manufacturers going to give to those people that are rebadged? So I think there might be a little bit of a gap there, and that's a real question that I've had twice in the last 3 weeks, and I think it might not be enough division. But that's just something I want to add there. And there's other little bits missing, or might be missing, that we need to pick up on and answer amongst ourselves.
Can I come in with a quick, please do, David.
Hi, I'm David Ashley of Direct Insight, and my company is involved at the product end with helping OEMs developing IoT products to achieve cybersecurity compliance. In terms of the gaps, it's urgency driven, isn't it? What things are there that people should have thought about already, or should be thinking about that they perhaps haven't? And I can come up with a couple, maybe three. First one, as mentioned, is vulnerabilities. One of the things we're doing, especially when open source software is involved, is providing strategies for vulnerability, for the detection and mitigation of exploitable vulnerabilities in customers' products. And it's not only important because of the reporting requirements that are coming up, it just takes a long time to get it right when you have a large quantity of open source software. So that's one thing. Another thing is updating your strategy. You must provide updates under the CRA, security updates, and therefore you need a strategy for doing that. These must be provided free of charge. So basically, in many IoT products, you need OTA updating. And again, your product design needs to be capable of that implementation. Then we have schemes for doing that. We have an internal product that uses Amazon IoT for updating, and we have over 1 million devices out there already being updated silently using that scheme. But you can't take it for granted that your hardware architecture and your software architecture is even going to be capable of adopting updating. You've got to think about it at the product design level. And the final thing, just to mention quickly, is manufacturing strategy. I think it was Richard, mentioned it earlier. You've got to have some sort of well thought out, potentially secure manufacturing, or you've got to have separate secure steps in your manufacturing so that you can put key infrastructures which need to be secure into your IoT device. And that takes quite a lot of planning and organisation.
Thanks, David. Just before I open to the floor, I'm just keen to get some other reactions from people who didn't present this morning. Ras, do you want to give us an impression of this morning, if I may?
Yeah, sure. I'm not a CRA expert. I'm one of the ones who had a little bit of understanding of it and came today. And to be honest, so my first impression is just the amount of documentation and processes you need to put in place. But also another thing is, with CRA, we have to provide lifetime device lifecycle protection. And especially with embedded and IoT applications, there are some devices which basically once you ship it, it's not worth updating for any even a feature request. But these manufacturers will now have to think of a way of device management, actually having track and figuring out how to push security updates. And that's a huge game changer. And I think that one of the biggest challenges for some of the manufacturers out here, and that's kind of my understanding.
No, that sounds like a great start. I think I actually touched on that slightly myself this morning. Everybody assumes everything's connected, but the CRA that's the big difference between RED and CRA. RED is about connection and wireless product. CRA is about, has it got a digital element? And to your point, it's a really, there are going to be products that aren't necessarily connected, but there's still the question, or let me put it this way, they shouldn't be intentionally connected, but they might be inadvertently connected, and then it's how are they protected, how do they get updated?
Exactly.
Great stuff. Mr. Neer, can I bring you in at this point?
Of course. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Neer. I'm from a company called Element, and like Joe and Alex, we are also in the space of testing and certifying products for cybersecurity, Medium Directive, and soon to be the CRA. So, my reaction from this morning, I mean, I've been quite close to the CRA, you could say standardization work and various other things, as one of the hopefuls to become a notified body under the CRA, very close to that side of things. And so my reaction, I suppose, is, you know, even with that inside knowledge, if you can call it that, is, wow, we've got a challenge ahead of us. Everyone who is thinking about the CRA and is involved has got a challenge. I think it should be quite clear from this morning's presentations that we have challenges. There are many of them. There are many details and nuances and all sorts of little things to wrap our heads around. And I think organizations are all going to approach it from different angles, depending on who we are and where we sit in the whole ecosystem of organizations, whether we're developing products, helping manufacturers develop products, or helping them test and demonstrate conformity with the requirements. I think if I was going to put one bit of advice that I've certainly been telling people who ask me, it's apart from engaging early, it's recognizing that this is a big challenge. I don't want to say problem. There's a lot to deal with, and organizations have to recognize that this goes up and down from the top to the organization as a priority. It's got to be something that is taken seriously from the organization, and more than just technical solutions, touching on some of the earlier comments, it's going to affect things like relationships with your suppliers, and upstream and also downstream with your customers. Talking about, you know, companies who rebadge products, let's say, and therefore become the manufacturer. I don't have an answer for, you know, any specific manufacturer to say, what do you do? But somewhere along the way, the answer is going to be having a better or stronger relationship with your supplier. And I think that's something that we're going to see with the CRA is a fundamental shift in the supply chain relationships up and down. And I think that's something to think about and then engage with early.
Great, thanks, Mr. Nick. Simon, can I just do a quick reaction from the morning and then I'll open to the floor? Thank you.
Yeah, in terms of what companies not be prepared for. I mean, I think these guys that speak to lots of companies have a better insight than I, because I only have an insight of one company. But just to re-emphasise one of the points I made this morning, I think the sort of ongoing processes and auditing of the ongoing processes is something that could be new to companies. I mean, 27001 is that sort of security audit is many companies will be aware of, and then you've got your ISO 9001 type audits. There's going to be a similar requirement for ongoing management of products, the cybersecurity of products, which I think may come as news of a lot of companies. So I suspect that's going to be a big gap.
Great, thanks, Simon. So from the floor, questions?
Just the release knowledge. Is this retrospective? So this CRA applies to products that are already in existence.
So if I may repeat the question for the purpose of the video. So one of the questions from the floor was, is this legislation retrospective? And I think by that meaning for products that already exist, but could then be after the applicability date, does the CRA affect them? Who would like to pick that one up first?
It's not me, you can start. Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Okay. The EU has a concept of product being placed on the market, and what this means effectively it's sold, it's put into the customer's hands or into the hands of distribution, and at that point the product has to be compliant. So from December the 11th, 2027. When the product effectively is shipped, it must be compliant. It doesn't matter if it's an existing product. in terms of the fact that model of product has been made and on the market, in the non-technical sense on the market, if you like, before. What matters is being transferred to the customer or the supply chain close to the customer. So at that point, the product must be compliant. Products already in the hands of customers, you may think, well, they can't possibly be affected, but that's not the case. The CRA says that if a product is substantially modified, and you might imagine this being done most obviously by a software update, if it's substantially modified, then it becomes retrospectively needing to be compliant with the CRA as well.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, you had a follow-up question.
The word substantial, is this a prescriptive statement or a subjective statement that gets debated?
Well, sorry, David, can I just repeat that?
That's a really good.
Would you like to just repeat the comment?
Okay. The question was, what is meant by a substantial modification? Is that a subjective assessment, or is there some objectivity around it? And the answer to that is it's a really good question. And the EU has issued some draft guidance earlier this year. And the draft guidance discusses what is meant by substantial modification. And indeed, it gives examples, which is really useful. And that really narrows the field for getting away with it in terms of subjectivity, because the examples given, which I can't immediately recall, but I can certainly point you to the guidance afterwards if it's helpful. The examples given really do make it pretty clear what would be substantial and what not.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was basically the gist of everything covered from your question. The only other slight thing I would add is in terms of placing on the market is the software support period, and that applies to different each individual product. So if you're placing a batch of products on the market with a 5-year support period, for example, and then you place an identical batch of that product on the market 2 years later, they've got to have another 5-year support period, or however long you have for that support period. So there's elements to take into account for that kind of thing as well.
Okay. Another question from the floor. Trevor, please.
I don't know much about the single reporting platform, and it sounds like not many people do, but there's been a platform that's been knocking around in the States called CVE from MITRE for quite some time. How similar are the two, and do they follow a similar sort of process? I mean, I've used CVEs and MITRE within my job, and it's horrible, but at least it works.
Trevor, can I just repeat the question? So the question from the floor, thank you, Trevor. Trevor's already familiar with MITRE and how CVEs are handled on the American MITRE system, and the question was, how different is the CSERT and the NESA reporting system? Who'd like to pick? Sorry, you'll set that one up.
Yeah, I'll say that. I mean, ITRON, we are a US-based company, so I know that we use MITRE as well for vulnerability assessments. The single reporting platform is not for vulnerabilities. That's the EUVD is where those vulnerabilities will go. The single reporting platform is for when things have gone wrong, and hopefully they won't go wrong very often. So that's when you put in your incidents or your the vulnerabilities that have been hacked. In terms of what that looks like, as I say, I genuinely am the only person in this room that will have seen it, but I just saw a demonstration on Monday, and therefore I don't think I can really say too much. To be honest, I personally have not been involved with MITRE. My concern, however, is that, as I said in my presentation, a lot of the fields are free text. So the reason that this system is used is not to manage the problems themselves, is actually, I think the main reason for it is so that every period of time, I think every 2 years, and NESA will do an assessment, and they'll basically force it together and be giving a summary of the sorts of incidents that have occurred in Europe. But if the data that's going in is not consistent, I'm not entirely sure that the data coming out will be consistent.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the advantages of the MITRE system. It is relatively consistent in the field and what you can put in there. And so that means future analysis of those is, let's say, a little bit easier, but from moment you said free text areas, I thought, well, that's going to take a bit of thought to be able to work out what's going on.
Yeah, I don't know. Does anybody else on the panel have any experience of the EUVD system, the European vulnerability database? Yep.
Yeah, so I think, so I don't specifically have experience of EUVD except looking at it sometimes for reference to against CVs and vulnerabilities. I think on the whole conversation about this single reporting platform, and Simon's just touched on it, we often forget is to talk about, well, what is it for? And why is this single reporting platform there? And fundamentally, it is a tool for ENISA and the EU to understand what's going on in terms of security in the European Union. It is not a tool for manufacturers to share information about vulnerabilities with the public. There is a requirement somewhere in the CRA for manufacturers to share information about fixed vulnerabilities, but nowhere is it telling manufacturers, and it's not a tool for sharing information, disclosing stuff that they don't want to disclose. And there is even provision in the single reporting platform for the various CSERTs to withhold the sharing of information between themselves if that's reasonably justified for security objectives.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. More questions?
I have a question. So it's really about something that I've heard a couple of times today is about like with software updates, you're sort of it's been separated out like between feature and security updates, which is quite I've not heard that before where it's actually separated. But I'm wondering, is that because when you mentioned before about if you deliver a product, you say you will support that software for 5 years, then you make an update after 2 years. And then that resets your time for another 5 years from that point. Is that just if it's a feature update? So if you have to patch a security vulnerability, it's a tiny patch after say 3 years of support. Does that then reset your timer and you've got then to support the device for another 5 years? So how does that work?
I was going to just summarise it. Thanks, Mark. So the question was, with the separation of features and security patches, one of the questions then would be, in terms of the support period, if you've made a security patch which hopefully isn't too large, does that then reset, say, for example, 5 years support period? So you can imagine you've supplied a product, just as an example, for 5 years, and you supply a patch 2 years out. Does that then mean that you will then effectively support the product for 12 years? I think it's Alex, please.
Yeah, so I think there was a point made there maybe about something I said, so I just wanted to kind of clarify. So, yeah, the CRA requires that you have to make security updates available to the product, and you have to define how long you're going to do that for. The point I was making was that that applies per product. So if you're putting a batch of 10,000 products on in 2030 and they've got a 5-year support period, you then put another 10,000 on the market, in 2031, they've got a separate 5-year support period. But when you've done a security update, it doesn't necessarily mean that it kind of resets that 5-year period. That 5-year period can be kind of maintained still. And obviously it's a commercial decision if you want to support it for longer than that, but it doesn't get necessarily reset as a result of providing a security update. I mean, I guess where you're saying separate between features and security, obviously, if you've introduced a new feature and you made a substantial modification, then that could be a new product and you've got to go around your conformance again and get it redone. That potentially might have to kind of come up with a new support period then because you've got to figure out how you come up with that number. But yeah, it doesn't automatically, as I understand it, reset just because you've provided a security update. So that's clarifying the point I was making anyway. But, yeah.
Anybody else want to make a song?
Yeah, I mean, I think my understanding is the reason that software and functionality firmware updates have been split is because the Commission wants to give the customer the opportunity to say, okay, that new functionality, whatever those minor bug fixes, I'll do that on my own time, but I know that that's a security fix. I know that needs to be done. So I think that's the main reason why it's done. This idea, however, of something resetting is kind of new to me. My understanding would be it's only when you buy something. So if there's a functional update and it's free, then I would say it would be reasonable to assume that the customer should accept that that's part of the original procurement. If you pay something extra, I guess you'd have to talk to the lawyers as to whether that's a new product or not.
Any of the labs want to pick that one up, Mr. Neil?
Yeah, just to add to that, really, is an interesting sort of a thought that comes off this topic, because the issue of publishing the support period, actually, for those of us in the UK, is not new. We met this in the PSDI, for consumer products at least, and there wasn't a lot of conversation about this at the time, but the interesting thing is, like, what is the support period for? And certainly in the PSDI world, it was largely driven to give consumers the ability and the ability to make purchasing decisions and to judge products and have an expectation around, well, if I buy this, how long is it going to be supported for? How long is it going to stay secure? And maybe even that might be a driver between I choose this product versus that product. And there are things wrapped up in the CRA as well that are more aligned with user rights and the consumer rights than they are about, strictly speaking, security. And that would be one of them, I would suggest.
Thanks very much, Mr. Neil. I think we've got time for one more question. Well, I know somebody's got a question. Yes, please.
So with CRA, do you envisage any extra issues? Say you sold consumer products, but you want to actually release a beta feature for your customers to try their sign up for?
It's an interesting question. So if I can just replay the question. So it's a consumer product and you want to introduce a beta feature. How does that fit in CRA? Interesting question. Who'd like to pick that one up? Ooh.
So, given that the CRA actually does, or was it SafeShark that distinguished between a product feature release and a security release, I would think as long as the beta feature does not have any negative implications on the security capabilities of the product, the CRA should be fine. Because the whole point of the CRA is to make sure that the product is secure by design. So even if it's a beta feature, as long as you have the entire process of you have done the risk management, done the threat modeling, and you have got the traceability and done the appropriate testing, and it is compliant with CRA, that should not have an impact.
Can I just add this to that? So there is an interesting question. Is it coming through? You mean? Yeah, interesting question. And I'm going to have a guess at an answer on that, but I want to make a statement of what your husband's prompted me, something I missed this morning, I think. But if the product's already out there, and it's a beta feature, then is it just a feature of that product that's already out there?
That could be, but if it negatively impacts the security, then how does that imply? Because would that product no longer be CRA compliant at that point?
Right, so that's exactly what I was hoping would happen on this conversation, because I don't have the answer. But what you pointed out there is what I was trying to get into this morning. We need more discussions like this as part of the, part of the IOTSF, but in the CRA community. I can't think of any other situations where we have these conversations and chew these questions over. So thank you for that. You've probably started the seed. So, I'll pass it on to somebody else.
Yeah, I'm going to hazard an answer, but it's not an original answer. I've read it somewhere and I can't remember where from. Some respected colleague, I think, who's looked into this, and the answer was if the new functionality was foreseen by the original risk assessment, then you're okay. If it was not foreseen and therefore changes the nature of the compliance task, you've got to recertify.
That's what I meant.
I can't claim credit to that.
I'm going to dive in as well. But I think we're all in a mood for some pain. It does stretch my understanding of the CRA a little, but I'm glad David mentioned risk assessment, because that's the thing that really sits at the heart of compliance with the CRA. If you read the actual requirements, most of them start with, on the basis of the risk assessment, do X, Y, Z. And the risk assessment is also fundamentally the tool that decides, for example, or helps to decide, have you made a substantial modification or not with respect to substantial modifications. It comes back to each time, and going back to, again, it's very circular, the CRA. So these things about secure life cycle and secure development, each time you're making a change, it should cause a manufacturer to revisit that risk assessment and understand or determine, well, what is the impact to risk, what is the impact to the threats on that product based on this proposed feature. Once that's all been hashed out, then you understand, right, is this does this have an impact, and is this therefore a substantial modification, so it changes your risk assessment, or was it already foreseen in sort of what the risk assessment covers? So that would all affect things with respect to that specific feature. What is the impact? Maybe supplying that is a substantial modification and it has those implications. Maybe not. It depends very much on that specific feature, which is why the process is there. Go back to the risk assessment each time to figure it out. It also, I'm going to open another can of worms because it's about to finish. It also brings into the fact that the CRA does apply to software-only products. And there is explanation, I think, I can't remember if it's in the CRA text itself and guidance, that talks about the provision of, for example, beta versions of software, or providing access to users to legacy versions of software. And that's all allowed. And the key thing there, certainly in the software space, is that access to these maybe non-compliant or older versions of the software is done with the user fully aware of and acknowledging the risks associated with that.
So that's a really great point. I would make two very quick observations in here, because as you say, that's quite a can of worms you're about to deliver. But it's a great question. It really is a great question. I would definitely back that one. So I've got two thoughts on that one. The first one is, of course, there's also, so firstly, there's the considerations around spare parts. So, for example, you have a customer, they have an old piece of equipment, it predates CRA. So at that point, the obvious thing would be that part will be suppliable, whatever version of firmware was being supplied at the time. So that's, I think that also addresses an earlier conversation about, is it retrospective? But the other thing to keep in mind with the scope of the CRA, I didn't really touch on it this morning, is the fact that one of the other exemptions is if the product is effectively intended, say, for a singular customer. Now that prompts the interesting question. Beta trials can be trialed across a wide user base. But if, for example, there was a particular beta customer, then there's even then the question, would that release be in scope if it was, say, for a limited customer base? I think we're back to Rustanir's point, that's, again, that all forms part of a risk assessment. But to Joe's point, I think a really great question, and certainly that's a really good use case that probably needs discussion. So if I may, I'm going to say thank you very much to the panelists. If you can show your appreciation in the usual way.